Would it not be in your best interest to act responsibly as a president while in power, rather than risk being investigated and exposed by your successor? This question holds particular relevance in many African nations where heads of state often make significant mistakes and then attempt to cover their tracks to avoid exposure to their misdeeds and illicit behaviors. A prime example of this is what's happening in Senegal at the moment. The newly elected president Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Ousmane Sonko have decided to dig into the past activities of former President Macky Sall, and what they've uncovered is shocking. It reveals how three Western masters controlled Senegal by dictating to Macky Sall what he should and should not do. Who are these three Western masters who controlled Macky Sall during his time in office? Stay with us until the end as we reveal the findings of this investigation. Let's dive right in. Senegal has experienced a turbulent political and democratic landscape in recent years, primarily due to one man's attempts to cling to power despite his term ending. This did not sit well with the Senegalese people, who took to the streets to oppose Macky Sall's agenda, accusing him of trying to rob the nation of its future by extending his stay in power despite his poor performance. Under his reign, the country faced massive unemployment, high living costs, poverty, and a severe depletion of fish in Senegalese waters, which led to a surge in irregular migration to Europe by Senegalese fishermen using wooden boats. Despite these significant issues, Macky Sall's administration was also plagued by rampant corruption, mismanagement of public funds, fraudulent oil and gas contracts, and questionable mining deals. However, the most alarming discovery is Macky Sall's alignment with Western interests, leading to the implementation of a controversial terrorism law in Senegal. According to Ousmane Sonko, Macky Sall enacted this law despite Senegal having no history of terrorism or terrorist activities. Sonko questioned why such a law was necessary when Senegal had never experienced terrorist attacks, with the exception of the MFDC rebels in the Casamance region. These rebels have sought independence from the Senegalese government for over a decade, but they do not typically target civilians. The sporadic and often halted military offensives by the Senegalese government have left the MFDC rebels largely unchecked. The true purpose of the terrorism law, according to PF investigations and Ousmane Sonko, was to protect Macky Sall's interests and those of his three Western masters, whom we will reveal shortly. The law was intended to silence anyone who opposed Macky Sall's regime by labeling them as terrorists and imprisoning them. This law led to the unjust imprisonment of many people who stood up against Macky Sall's wrongdoings. Even the Senegalese and British parliaments rejected the law, seeing it as a violation of human rights. Macky Sall's administration saw a drastic rise in public discontent, with widespread protests and civil unrest. The people of Senegal, frustrated by the lack of economic opportunities and the government's failure to address pressing issues, took to the streets in large numbers. The protests were not just about Macky Sall's desire to cling to power. They were a manifestation of deep-seated frustrations that had been brewing for years. High unemployment rates, skyrocketing living costs, and the depletion of natural resources such as fish in Senegalese waters contributed to the anger and disillusionment among the populace. The surge in irregular migration to Europe by desperate Senegalese fishermen in wooden boats highlighted the severity of the economic crisis. Despite these challenges, Macky Sall's administration was embroiled in numerous corruption scandals. Allegations of mismanagement of public funds, fraudulent oil and gas contracts, and questionable mining deals became rampant. These scandals eroded public trust in the government and painted a picture of an administration more focused on enriching itself and its cronies than on serving the people. The discovery of Macky Sall's alignment with Western interests added another layer to the complex political landscape. According to Ousmane Sonko, Macky Sall enacted the controversial terrorism law under the influence of his Western masters. This law, despite Senegal's lack of a history of terrorism, was designed to silence opposition and protect Macky Sall's interests. Sonko questioned the necessity of such a law in a country that had never experienced terrorist attacks, except for the MFDC rebels in the Casamance region. These rebels, who have sought independence from the Senegalese government for over a decade, do not typically target civilians. The sporadic and often halted military offensives by the Senegalese government have left the MFDC rebels largely unchecked. The terrorism law, according to PF investigations and Ousmane Sonko, was intended to silence anyone who opposed Macky Sall's regime by labeling them as terrorists and imprisoning them. This draconian measure led to the unjust imprisonment of many people who stood up against Macky Sall's wrongdoings. Even the Senegalese and British parliaments rejected the law, seeing it as a violation of human rights. But who are these three Western masters that controlled Macky Sall? The first is Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Blair visited Senegal multiple times to advise Sall, and his influence is widely recognized. Known for his controversial actions in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq, Blair has a history of manipulation and spreading falsehoods. His involvement in the enactment of Senegal's terrorism law raises serious questions about his motives and the nature of his influence over Macky Sall. The second Western master is Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president of France. Sarkozy has a notorious history of controversial actions, including his role in the destabilization of Libya and the spread of jihadist terrorism in the Sahel region. His influence over Macky Sall is particularly troubling given his past actions and statements about Africa. Sarkozy's involvement in Senegalese politics and the enactment of the terrorism law reflects a broader pattern of Western interference in African affairs. The third Western master is Jean-Michel Frédéric Macron, a leading French counterterrorism magistrate. Macron frequently visited Senegal to advise Macky Sall and played a significant role in shaping the country's counterterrorism policies. His influence over Macky Sall highlights the extent to which Western interests shaped Senegal's political landscape during Sall's administration. In conclusion, the investigation into Macky Sall's presidency reveals a complex web of corruption, mismanagement, and foreign influence. The enactment of the controversial terrorism law, under the influence of Western masters, was a blatant attempt to silence opposition and protect Sall's interests. This investigation underscores the importance of transparency, accountability, and the need for African leaders to prioritize the interests of their people over foreign influence. African leaders must realize that while collaboration with Western countries can be beneficial, these Western leaders primarily have their own interests at heart. African heads of state should stop being puppets of the West and focus on defending the interests of their own people. Only then can they ensure true progress and independence for their nations. The need for African leaders to prioritize the interests of their people is more urgent than ever. The economic and social challenges faced by many African countries require strong and effective leadership. Leaders must focus on creating economic opportunities, improving living conditions, and addressing pressing issues such as unemployment, poverty, and the depletion of natural resources. This requires a commitment to good governance, transparency, and accountability. Moreover, African leaders must be wary of foreign influence and interference. While collaboration with Western countries can bring benefits, it must be done on equal terms and in the best interests of the African people. Leaders must resist the temptation to become puppets of foreign powers, and instead focus on building strong, independent nations that can stand on their own. The investigation into Macky Sall's presidency serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of foreign influence and the importance of prioritizing the interests of the people. It is a call to action for African leaders to step up and take responsibility for the future of their nations. By doing so, they can ensure a brighter and more prosperous future for their people. As we conclude, it's important to reflect on the lessons learned from this investigation. The events in Senegal serve as a cautionary tale for other African nations. Leaders must be vigilant and proactive in protecting the interests of their people. They must strive to create a political and economic environment that fosters growth, stability, and prosperity. This requires a commitment to good governance, transparency, and accountability. At the same time, African leaders must work together to resist foreign influence and interference. By standing united, they can create a stronger and more resilient continent that can withstand external pressures and challenges. This requires a collective effort and a shared vision for the future of Africa. In conclusion, the investigation into Macky Sall's presidency is a powerful reminder of the importance of good governance, transparency, and accountability. It underscores the need for African leaders to prioritize the interests of their people and resist foreign influence. By doing so, they can ensure a brighter and more prosperous future for their nations and their people. We hope this investigation has shed light on the challenges and complexities of governance in Africa. We encourage you to stay informed and engaged in the political process. Your voice and your actions can make a difference. Together, we can create a better future for Africa. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. If you did, please support our work by liking this video and subscribing to the Voice of Africa YouTube channel. The Africa's Own channel looks into the brutal affairs of the motherland that are often ignored by mainstream media. Please show your support by liking and subscribing. Thank you so much.